Hey Emma,
Yes, Madeline.
what would you say if I asked you to describe something about your female friend who works at an apiary?
I don't even know what an apiary is. What would I say?
Shinobi.
Ah, okay.
Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your comedy ninja host, Madelyn.
I'm your, I don't know what a bee place is called, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This week we're talking about Shinobi and we're talking about Helldivers too. So You're going to have to put in your PlayStation account info to listen to this podcast.
You know, very smart. I didn't even pick up. It's the bug connection there.
Yeah.
You joke.
You know what? That was intentional.
Yeah.
So we'll get to everyone's favorite, fascism simulator, right? But first, let's talk about ninjas.
I feel like when you say fascism simulator, it makes me picture something that I understand what you're saying, but it also does not describe what you're doing playing that game.
That's correct.
Okay. Just
I understand that the game is not about that. It's
before
about
our unaware listener goes like 20 minutes thinking about fascism simulator. I feel like I should clear that up a little bit. But yes, let's talk about Shinobi.
That's fair. How about your favorite, grief your friends simulator?
Right.
But ninja time. Ninja. Shinobi is a side-scrolling hack-and-slash game from Sega. The original game came out in 1987 for arcade systems, and then went other places, and they released a bunch of other games.
Yeah, it was the Sega's Master System at the time. I know it went to a lot of other places, but that was the Sega era that this came out.
In this game, you play as Joe Musashi, which, is a guy you might know if you know Sega, because he's one of the kind of Sega mascot characters, although Sonic, I feel like, has eaten them all.
Yeah. I think it's really just Sonic now.
Only Sonic. Sonic and, Ono Michio, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's become, a company-defining mascot, though.
Yet.
Sure.
Just you wait.
Yeah.
But you play as Joe Musashi, who, you might think that that's just the name of the character in the West, but I think he's Joe Musashi everywhere.
Yeah.
And he's the head of a clan of ninjas. And throughout many of these games, the Zed ninjas, who are a terrorist evil ninja group, are kidnapping his buddies. Or causing havoc, and you gotta stop them.
I was struck in looking through this series. I think the majority of these games, in fact, do not star Joe Musashi.
That's right. The first three do. And then there's one other one that's sort of ambiguous depending on region.
Well, you say the first three, but not even the first three chronologically, right? In release order, I mean.
Well, the first two, definitely. Three, I kind of lose track of because there's a lot of stuff happening at the same time.
Because which one of them in the West, it's Joe Musashi, and in Japan, it's his son. Is that Shadow Dancer?
I think so.
Yeah. So some of them only sort of star Joe Musashi, too.
Many of them star various Musashi family members.
Yeah. Up until, the PS2 revivals, I guess.
Shinobi was a very popular arcade game. We did an episode on jumping a little while ago, jumping in games, and the jump in Shinobi, very beloved, very jumpy. But yeah, you pretty much you run around and jump, and you hit guys with your little ninja sword and your little ninja stars.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just the arcade versions, but a couple of the first ones also have like a bonus mode that's like first person shuriken throwing in addition to the side scrolling part.
Which really probably deserves its own game.
It's Fruit Ninja, right?
Fruit Ninja, you aren't throwing it though, you're slashing.
Yeah, but what do you think was the inspiration for Fruit Ninja? Where do you think it came from?
You're so right.
Yeah, I
thought it was from the experience of cutting up fruit, but you're so right.
No, it was definitely from Shinobi.
Yes, Shinobi released during a time in the 80s where it was the ninja era.
Yeah.
Big ninja time. Big ninja days.
Yes, it's a very influential game in the history of ninja gaming.
The long history.
It is long.
I know.
The 80s, you might say.
I know. I was saying it in a sort of silly, jokey way, but it's true.
Yeah, alongside the likes of Ninja Gaiden, which I should probably put in the hat at some point, and others like it. Definitely a big ninja time.
So it was a big arcade success. And so they ported it to the Sega Master System, and then to the NES, and then to PC. And it used to be available on mobile and on Switch too, but it's been delisted sometime in recent years, probably because they're going to make another one.
Yes. If we had done this, when was the Game Awards? November?
December.
Like 6 months ago, we would have said like, oh ho, a dead Sega franchise. What a rarity.
Yeah.
But now it is, in fact, that is a rarity because they're reviving like all of
every
their
single one
franchises. So, including Shinobi.
And yeah, now you can't play the old ones. You're not allowed to play the old ones.
I guess. All right. Who knows why things get delisted? Honestly,
it's true. Probably the licensing rights to ninjas went away.
Well. That's sort of the one fun little anecdote I was reading about Revenge of Shinobi was their blatant disregard for copyright.
Yes. A different era, I have to say.
Where the original release had Rambo. He fought Rambo. Very Spider-Man looking guy. But more on the Spider-Man looking one. Batman, who was in fact the same guy as Spider-Man, as we all know. Famous comics lore. Bruce Wayne, Peter Parker, Spider-Man,
same
Batman,
guy.
Same guy. And also Godzilla. All of these were subsequently changed past the original release. Rambo became bald, so he's not Rambo anymore. Batman became more of like an actual like demon creature thing. And they turned Godzilla into Skeleton Godzilla, which of course is not Godzilla, right? Spider-Man, however, was initially changed to look more like Spider-Man because Sega did have the rights to Spider-Man at the time. But when they lost those, they then changed it to be sort of just like a purple guy. Just sort of purple, crawly spider guy.
Does Sylvester Stallone still have hair?
I don't know.
I was just wondering if, like, is that now correct for Rambo?
You're right. Maybe they're just being historically accurate.
Forward thinking.
Mm-hmm. So, would they delist it for lost music rights or whatever things usually get delisted for? Who knows?
There's all sorts of fun, like, patent and copyright things. This game was originally supposed to be released on the Atari Jaguar, like, as part of a sort of a deal where it's, like, Sega kind of infringed on their patent when they were making the Genesis. So, like, they were supposed to, like, cross-publish some stuff, but it never did. But people loved Shinobi. My usual thing where, like, I saw somebody commenting on, like, the re-release of it, and they were like, is this something you would pay, $40 for? And here's my always comment with arcade games, which is, like, on one hand, like, no, of course you wouldn't. On the other hand, how much did the average 13-year-old boy spend on this game?
Yeah.
Like, while it was out, you wonder.
The arcade version of the original Shinobi was a one-hit kill system. The console version did have a health bar for you. But I think for the arcade version, yeah, you were probably eating a lot of quarters there.
In traditional ninja fashion, you do eventually trade your shuriken, right, your throwing stars, for a gun.
Of course.
Because that's...
Well, I think you are being shot at with guns for most of
Sure.
Shinobi, at least. There's some guys with guns. But yeah. What games does he have a gun for? Because they don't in the PS2 ones.
In the original one.
Oh, they like updated it?
I think they no, like during the game you eventually traded in for a gun.
Oh, I see.
Another like fun like arcade difference is somebody was saying that, I think this was in Revenge of the Shinobi, which was the sequel, or maybe it was several of them. In the arcade version, it had sort of a light version of dynamic difficulty, which apparently was not that uncommon for arcade games, even though it's something that has become more challenging to implement here, where basically, like, if you died fighting a boss, the next time the boss's health bar would be a little bit smaller if you did a continue, so it'd be easier to beat. But it was a good incentive to, like, keep spending money, right?
Right.
Because it's like, oh, like, this is my chance. I've died a bunch, and the boss's health bar is half of what it was.
Would it get down that far?
I don't think it would get down that far. They did say there was a cap at the bottom eventually. It wouldn't keep going down.
No, I think only the original and maybe Revenge were actually arcade games.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
So not the majority of the series. They've mostly been Sega console games.
Well, and Shadow Dancer, which is an important one to call out because there are following ones that do this as well, but for the first time adds, again, a tradition of the Shinobi ninja tradition, a canine companion.
Oh, yes. I remember seeing that. No, it was, it was just Shinobi and Shadow Dancer that were arcade. Revenge of Shinobi was not. So yeah, just two of them. But yeah, the Shadow Dancer ones had canine companion, I believe.
You wonder what spurred that decision.
I mean, I don't know. I think that's would be a common mythological thing, right?
Did ninjas have dogs?
There's a lot of dogs in Japanese folklore.
I guess that's true.
I mean, there's a lot of everything in Japanese folklore.
I just sort of felt like having a dog following you around might make being a ninja a little harder.
I mean, they can sense things that you can't, right? So doesn't it make it better?
But they bark.
Not a well-trained dog.
And people see them and they're like on the lookout for them all the time. Like when I'm walking around, I'm looking for dogs. You know?
I don't think that's quite the world that Joe Musashi lives in.
It's just crazy that, you know, Joe Musashi here and Sega were really ahead of their time. Like, this is the kind of thing that you feel like would get added in today's can you pet the dog era. And they were...
Can you pet the dog, though? I don't think so.
I don't think you can. I do not think you can pet the dog. And I'm sure that is something they will rectify if there is a dog in the new one that they are making.
Yeah, well, the preview for it was 2D side-scrolling.
Yes.
So I guess they are sticking with the more traditional way Shinobi has been presented. I don't think there was any dog shown in that footage, though. But it was probably like 10 seconds of footage tops, I think. So who knows?
You just don't know.
We won't know until they release more information on all those titles.
I did like, in researching it, I looked at some old advertisements for Shinobi.
Yeah.
And like, man, I love the old style of ad that's just like, it's just text. It's just a bunch of text and like one graphic, basically.
I mean, I really think we need to bring back more... Well, I guess these exist still, don't they? There still are live action ads for video games, but they have like celebrities in them now. I don't think we should do that. Because I did see one for the 2002 reboot on the PS2. That's like this guy playing Shinobi on the arcade, and like people break in, and then the new protagonist comes in and kills them, and his sword hits the thing, and he looks around and goes, "Shinobi is back!" And that's the ad. And I think that's the style of ad that we need.
Well, I liked this one. It's a bunch of text and like the Sega logo, and in the middle of it, there's like a cardboard box that says Shinobi on it. And it says in big letters at the top, after installing Shinobi, save the carton to haul your money to the bank.
What does that mean?
It's like if you're an arcade owner buying the arcade thing.
Yeah.
Like the first sentence of all the text at the bottom is like, there's a lot to like about Shinobi. First, it's from Sega, which means it's a good bet to be a big money maker. It's like, man, imagine that.
That's what the Sega, that was very much Sega's brand at the time, right? Very
yeah,
confident.
I know.
So.
And it's got stunning graphics, outrageous villains, and pulsating sound. I think more video games should advertise their pulsating sound in the year 2024.
I mean, you know, with like they sort of do on when they're like PlayStation exclusives, right? They're always like the rich 3D audio, which might as well be pulsating sound.
You're
honestly.
right.
So, but as we said, most of the Shinobis are 2D platformers. But there were two on the PlayStation 2 that were like supposed to be sort of a reboot, soft relaunch of the franchise that obviously did not go anywhere.
Yeah, it did not launch.
Where though they were 3D action, which if you're making a 3D action game, I want you to look at like your character design right now and be like, should they have a scarf that grows when they move? And I think that we all know the answer should be yes.
They should.
Because the design and the way that the two characters, because they both have this in different ways, the two protagonists of Shinobi and Nightshade, which I think is just called Kunoichi in Japan.
In that one, based on the title, you might have figured this out. You play as a lady ninja.
Yes, but they both have scarves that when you move them around, like they get longer and like sort of trail behind them, sort of like a movement line. What's like if you were like doing like the bikes in Tron and they have like the line of light that comes out from behind it, what would you call that?
Trail.
The trail, yes. They have a scarf that follows them like a trail, essentially. It's very cool looking.
More scarves, Emma says.
And then there was one last one for the 3DS. And nothing since then until the Game Awards.
Yeah, that was 2011. So this series was pretty well and truly dead. I mean, you know, what I'll say is obviously since 2011, there's been a real resurgence of the 2D platformer. That's not recent. That's like, you know, over the course of the past like 5 or 6 or 7 years, there's been a real resurgence of the 2D platformer. So it's, you know, in that sense, it makes sense as a time to bring this back. Capitalize on the nostalgia, but it's also a genre that people are into.
Yeah, I don't really know if, I mean, considering that Sega announced like 5 different revivals from previous game series, I think they were probably just looking at their own catalog and picking at the things that were the most popular for them, and the most sort of enduring or iconic, rather than being like, ah, yes, the 2D platformer, the 3D brawler, the Jet Set Radio, right? So... But you're right. Yes, there has definitely been people like 2D platformers, for sure.
But even back then, you know, Shinobi was known for being quite punishingly difficult. And
it's not really a platformer, too, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's platforming.
Yeah, but
it's
it's
a
not,
beat 'em up.
It's not, the challenge is not jumping.
No.
It's the action part.
Yeah, that's fair. But it has platforming elements. And it's also known for having pretty good enemy AI for it being originally released in the 80s. They will hide behind things to reload. Which enemies sometimes still won't do, you know? Ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Shinobi has a level in the late game that's like a maze that's pretty notorious. I was looking at someone, and this also felt like a portal to another era, right? You know, speaking of our old strategy guide episode and that sort of thing. But someone on Reddit had drawn a map of this labyrinth maze level of like with all these like little symbols and like arrows everywhere, and just like drawn it on a piece of paper. And it's like, wow, like, I guess that's how you had, if you were playing this in an arcade, or Revenge of the Shinobi is not an arcade game, so it's part of why you can get away with this. But if you were playing this in an arcade, that's crazy. Like, you would have to do that, right? If you wanted to get through the really hard level, you'd have to, like, diagram it out for yourself.
Yeah, mapping was a big part of all games at that time, I think.
And now totally disappeared.
Well, I mean, they've just figured out a way to do mapping for you.
Right. So I don't
still,
mean
if you have a game without a map, you're probably drawing your map for yourself.
I know, but that's just so rare. A lost art. Cartography.
You know, I drew those maps of each continent for AP World History.
That sucked.
So maybe that's better off lost.
The music from the game was a pretty big hit. It's from Yuzo Koshiro. During this time where game music was very like kind of house music inspired. So it has some real pulsating music. They're absolutely right to say that. It has some real beats being laid down. It was funky. I played some of the music. I was like, oh yeah. Absolutely.
I think we should go back to the bit music.
You heard it here first.
Cancel orchestras.
Yeah, put the orchestras out of work. Absolutely.
Only boops and beeps, please.
Yeah, can you play the boop? Can you play the beep? Otherwise, we don't want you. But anyway, it was from this guy, Yuzo Koshiro, who was a relatively big name in video game composing in this era. Basically just because, unlike literally everyone else who made games at this point, he was credited on title screens as the composer. And there was he had tweeted about this semi-recently. He was like, you know, the only reason that happened is because my mom, told me I had to do it.
Yeah.
She was like, you have to have your name on this. Like, who am I? It was someone, some famous kind of movie star, said to her that somehow she knew. She was said to her, you've got to have your name on things. And so she was like, you've got to have your name on it.
It's right. That's correct.
Yeah, not wrong. But just, he was like, Sega didn't really care. They said, okay, that's fine.
Well, speaking of this is fine, I don't know.
I wish I could have played Shinobi. Maybe. It's the kind of game that it's like, oh, if I had that in front of me, I think I would enjoy playing it, you know?
Yeah. Like
Having
when you played Prince of Persia, right?
What?
Like when you played Prince of Persia, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's the kind of game that's like, I'm not going to buy this, but if you would put it in front of me, I would probably enjoy it.
Yeah.
Good for Joe that he's making a comeback. Fingers crossed for him.
See if it is him.
It has to be, right? I mean, I don't know. If you're making
it really doesn't. More than half the series is not him.
I know, and you're right, but I feel like if you're resurrecting this game after 14 years or whatever, you're capitalizing on nostalgia enough that it's probably going to be Joe Musashi.
We'll see.
We'll find out. But yeah, it's time to dive into Hell 2. Helldivers 2 is 2024 cooperative sort of, probably cooperative, usually cooperative, online third-person shooter from Arrowhead Games, published by Sony for the PlayStation 5 and Windows. It came out in February of this year.
I mean, it's cooperative because there isn't any in-game incentive for competition.
That's right. I was joking about the ability to friendly fire your teammates.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's just something that's always on, essentially.
Yeah.
You can hit your teammates, regardless of whether you're meaning to or not. Which is part of the game's themes, I guess.
Yes. I considered playing this, but one, I didn't realize it was going to be $40. Which is fine. Nothing wrong with them charging $40 for this.
That's cheap, actually.
I know. I'm just used to my live service games being, free.
Sure.
But I also decided that after the huge firestorm this week, that maybe it wasn't the moment to like jump in with no experience to random multiplayer matches online.
Or maybe it was the time, you know?
Why do you say that?
Because there would be less people there?
You're right, I guess, of course. But they didn't actually implement the thing. I guess it did still get delisted from places. So you're right, I wouldn't have been able to play with anyone foreign. I could have just played with good Americans.
That's not what I meant. I just meant people were not playing out of protest.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Yes, they did walk that back. Yeah, so I guess before we get into the game proper, just recently, they had said this from launch, that there was you were going to have a PSN login to access online at a certain point. But they had put a pause on this because of bad server performance, essentially, to sort of make it up to people and make it so it was easier to try to get into a server without having to go through your whole login setup and whatever. But they had just recently announced that they were going to bring that back, but PSN is not offered in a very large amount of countries, like the majority of countries, honestly. So there was a lot of outcry. I feel like you could probably still do it with a VPN, but I mean,
you could.
You don't want to require everybody to get a VPN. Yeah. So there's a big public outcry about this. The developers themselves were not super happy. It was more of like a Sony mandate. But essentially it was supposed to be like more, it's a security measure, right? Of you have to log in and stuff. But they've walked that back and said they're going to try and brainstorm other ways to add some layer of security to actually getting into the servers. So we'll see what happens with that.
But yes, did lead to major review bombing.
Yep. They've been going up and down in reviews anyway. It was mixed at launch because of the way the servers were. But the developers said they were thinking about designing like a cape to put into the game with like the wave of red Steam reviews. So they're having some good humor about it. So, anyway, I watched Starship Troopers for my movie night last week, so I basically played the game.
Wow. Yeah, you're all set.
Yeah.
There's also now a major directive to rehabilitate the Steam reviews.
Yeah, in the game?
Well, no, I think the major directives don't come out in the game, right? Don't they come out online? I don't know. Somebody who's a mod in the Reddit posted it, and I don't know if it was like official or not, but it seems like it was tagged as if it was official. I don't know what's worse. But review bombing is so mysterious to me.
Yeah.
Just not how my brain operates at all.
I mean, you know, it's a tool, and unfortunately, I think it gets used most often for nonsense reasons.
Yeah.
But it's like the one way that a player can actually make their voice heard to developers, you know, without like sending them death threats, I guess. Right. It makes an impact on the game, particularly a live service game of this sort, although they shy away from the term live service. But, you know, and people have been, you know, positively review bombing Hi-Fi Rush this week, unrelated news. So it's just a way to say things to the people making the game. And I think this was a legitimate complaint.
Yeah.
That players had.
No, I agree. But it also just like, it's so childish. Like, I get that it's the only way, but it's unfortunate that it's the only way, because it feels to me like whiny whine.
I mean, that you have to do that if something is genuinely wrong, right?
I know, but why didn't everyone just write handwritten letters to Joel?
Who, like, you could do that, but, like, you don't know who to send that to.
I'm
right?
just kidding.
You're able to do this, and it's public, and whoever needs to see it can see it without you just sending random emails to
anyway,
people you don't actually know whether have control over the situation or not.
Ghost of Tsushima should watch their back.
Anyway, why don't we actually talk about the game?
Yeah.
Because you said stuff like major directive and didn't actually explain what that was. So.
I didn't. So in Helldivers 2, Helldivers 2 is a sequel to Helldivers, would you believe it? Which came out in 2015. That game was a top-down shooter with like shared screen, and this one is not shared screen and third-person shooter, so they've made some changes. In this game, you and your randomly matched or real and playing together online friends are Helldivers. And so you're the frontline fighting forces for Super Earth, the definitely good, definitely real democracy that is fighting to take over this land. And together, you shoot a lot of bugs called Terminids, and you shoot now a bunch of robot-y guys called automatons to save humanity and reclaim territory and just generally be good guys.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's nothing more to it than that.
Yeah, so the general gameplay is there's a bunch of different planets that open and close for liberation efforts, depending on what the current missions are and what the current status of each of those planets are. You can go in by yourself or with a squad of up to 4. While you're by yourself, you can call for help from anybody at random out there if you want, and they will come help you. Or you can drop into someone else's game who is asking for help at that time. And you essentially get some sort of mission, like destroy this, rescue civilians, retrieve this, repair this, etc., etc. You go and complete that mission. You gather, supplies and materials and stuff while you go, and then you extract, essentially. And if you successfully extract, you get to keep all of the stuff that you collected.
Woohoo.
And put that towards upgrading yourself and getting better weapons and getting better. There's the thing called stratagems, which you can bring a certain amount in, which are like you can call an airstrike, for example, or
big fancy weapons.
So various different types of things that you can upgrade yourself to do, and then you can try taking on more difficult missions, because there are difficulty levels in this, so you can choose to take on an easier mission or a harder mission, or I think the hardest difficulty is of course called Helldiver difficulty or whatever. But you want to be picking it based on your actual skill level so that you can successfully complete the mission and then be able to upgrade yourself so that you can take on harder missions.
Yeah, because you've got to support the aims of Super Earth.
Yep. You can use there are a few microtransactions, but it's possible to get those things just by completing missions as well. It's more like if you want to play catch up to like your friend who is already playing or something, I think.
Exactly.
You would do the microtransaction. But yeah. So that's essentially what you do.
Yeah. And they've, what's really been sort of interesting and special about Helldivers 2 is the kind of community response to it, right? It's hard to, and I know you were saying they're resistant to calling it a live service game, but like it is. It's hard to break into the live service market these days. People who are into that like have their games that they're playing, and being able to carve out space for them to add another game or replace one of those games, it's just a really tall order. But Helldivers 2 sold like 8 million copies in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it was a huge, like unexpectedly large sales success. And obviously because of that, the launch was really rough in terms of the servers being a disaster, which then...
Yeah, they aren't like a huge team. They've been trying to expand recently so that they can respond better to the amount of players that they have.
And speaking of team, I have a question for you, Emma. So, they've started to make a big deal out of this idea that there's one person at Arrowhead named Joel who is the game master. Like, he's the guy who's, like, getting up in the middle of the night and being like, just kidding, this planet is hard now. Or who's, like, writing the story, who's coming up with the major directives, which are objectives they send out via social media and otherwise to players, being like, we want you to kill this many bugs in this amount of time, or we want you to take over this planet for the war effort, blah blah blah. It's all very in character. But they've started to make up this idea of, okay, there's this guy Joel who's like pulling all the strings. Do you think that Joel is real?
Yeah. I mean, they might be exaggerating his role somewhat, but I imagine he's just story lead, right? And so a lot of, if someone's trying to do something, if someone under him is trying to do something, they probably do have to run it by him first, right? Or at least generally run it by him. So yeah, I think that's a real person.
I just feel like the way he's being talked about feels like, oh, they're gonna reveal in like 2 months that like there is no Joel. Feels very like in keeping with this.
Could probably look it up, honestly. Did you look up the... I didn't look up
I didn't, because I sort of assumed that someone in one of these articles would have been like, yeah, absolutely, it's Joe Schnitzerbludel.
I mean, they have credits, right? I'm sure they have credits in the game. I know. So you could probably look.
Maybe I will later. But it speaks to what the marketing element of this game is, that me being like, they said there's a guy named Joel who runs the story, I don't believe them, is a valid response.
I mean, I think, you know, there's certain levels of true and untrue it can be, but they certainly have a very robust system for being able to make changes in the game. They said it's like can be as granular as just giving a single player an extra stratagem, which is sort of like crazy. Like, don't do that. That's way too granular. But you have the ability to do that, right? You've worked that in so that if you ever wanted to do that, it's there.
Yeah, they were talking about that, of like there being human quote unquote dungeon masters giving individual players items, and I'm like, oh my god, like 10 million people own this game now, probably. Like, you're not really doing that, are you? That's insane.
Right. I imagine that's something that maybe happens only like around important spaces in the arc or whatever, right? If you have a lot of people on trying to finish up a goal or something, you might go into an individual party that's doing well or doing poorly and do something for them. But not like all the time. But they might have made that when they were thinking that there would be less players. But also, it's good to just, if you're making a tool, you might as well make a tool that accounts for all possibilities that you'd want to use it.
Absolutely.
Especially because technically Helldivers 2 is on an engine called Stingray, which is a discontinued engine from 2018. So they've had to do pretty much like, they've said like, oh, we've had to just do everything ourselves with this engine. But it's sort of a situation of like, you know, they'd already started making it, and additionally, all of their employees, all their engineers had been working with this engine, and so it's what they know how to use. So they decided to stick with using it for Helldivers 2.
So there's a lot of emergent narrative, emergent gameplay sort of around this game. There's a lot of community chatter about it. So as we were saying, you know, this game, you're like various disposable Helldivers fighting for Super Earth. And in some ways, right, this game has turned into like much more of an RPG than most RPGs. In that people are really role-playing the world, both on social media and in voice chat and in the game.
Right. I mean, there is a story. There's story built into the game, not just story outside of it.
Yes, but there is a lot of story outside of it.
Yes, but I'm just saying there's also the sort of traditional storytelling methods of logs you can find and letters and documents and stuff that you can pick up while you're on mission.
Yes. Lots of environmental bits and bobs, for sure. But it was fascinating, it's fascinating to have been kind of watching this from the outside and see how much of this I picked up by osmosis of just like people talking about it. And then, I always kind of enjoy reading about these sorts of games. Like, Helldivers is not ever going to be a game that I get super into just because I don't know. I don't enjoy playing with randos, even though by all accounts, for the most part, this is on the lower scale of toxicity community, even for people that are bad at it. But of course, when you have an install base that's this large, there's going to be some toxic people, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, there's some unfortunate. I mean, the like we said, there's always on friendly fire, which is good thematically for the space that the game is working in. But does mean that you can really mess someone's day up accidentally.
Yeah.
If you call an airstrike without being fully aware of where your teammates are, for example, which I think is like a common thing.
Common oops.
So it definitely encourages you. It encourages you to communicate more than a lot of other online games, but I think can also cause tense situations.
Yeah.
Just by its very nature. You can play solo, though. I watched a few videos that were like, okay, here's all the tips for successfully playing solo.
I just heard everyone saying it's so hard. It's like so hard to play solo. I was like, I don't think so.
All the videos I saw were like, everyone will tell you it's hard, and they're liars. So
okay,
you just have to play differently when you play solo, essentially.
Sure. They do have a let me solo her, apparently.
Yeah.
I was reading about that. Yeah, they have someone who's like filling a similar role as the infamous Elden Ring player. Which, like, good for them. Good for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of like fun twists and turns that the team has introduced into the narrative, right? There were bugs. It was just the bugs for a while, and then they introduced the automatons, and then they were like, bugs can't fly. Bugs can't ever fly. And now the bugs can fly.
Right.
And they like had to. So this game has all of these different planets, right? And for a while, a very infamous one, well-known one, was Malevelon Creek, aka apparently Robot Vietnam. Because you would go there and come back with horror stories.
Yeah, there's a very dedicated faction, or I think still is, to this particular planet called Creek Crawlers, that had essentially just sort of been keeping it barely alive. But there was a very brief bit during another defense of Mort, I think, where it was lost. But was then made available again pretty soon after. So that might have been a Joel thing,
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah. They were like, oops, we didn't actually want them to lose the planet.
Yeah. But yes, the players were obsessed with Malevelon Creek for a while, so much so that like people were spending a bunch of time there and getting killed, and it was annoying the people who were trying to pursue other goals. So like, it's so interesting to think about how you have to manage a community like this. Because on one hand, you've gotten everything you could have possibly wanted and then some, right? People are making all these memes. They're, like, talking to each other as, like, proud citizens of Super Earth and, like, role-playing these Helldivers. And, like, it's a crazy amount of kind of emergent narrative and emergent just, like, tomfoolery. But then it's like, oh, what do you do when the players are, like, obsessed with this one planet that you actually don't want them to be obsessed with?
Right.
Well, you put out a major directive that they have to conquer it in 24 hours.
Yeah. And
they do. # remember the creek.
Yep. It seems like a... Well, I don't know. I was going to say it seems like a fun project, but it also seems like it is not very fun, to be honest.
I do wonder what...
It depends on your temperament, I think.
I wonder what the end game of this is.
I do wonder how they're I mean, I guess they have a season pass, but it's like a permanent one. Like, you pay to unlock it, and then you have it, I believe.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't know how they're making money.
I mean, I guess you have to bear in mind that they probably didn't expect, what percentage of the installs that they have here did they actually expect?
Sure. You're right. No, I think they've certainly made a lump sum, but at a certain point, you will wonder how they will continue making money.
Well, but I'm also saying that if you have, this is certainly not correct. Let's go with this. If you have 10 times more players playing this game than you anticipated, you also have 10 times more people buying the pretty optional cosmetics or whatever in the game.
Sure. I suppose so.
Maybe. I mean, maybe probably it's not one-to-one like that. But it's interesting to think about, right? There definitely have to be increased costs associated with maintaining a game that has gotten way, way bigger than it was intended.
Yeah. But
how much of that, do those costs grow completely in parallel with the additional revenue? It's hard to know.
But I mean, it's just, I feel like they must have, even if they're buying the cosmetics, like the revenue will go down eventually, right? Because it is an upfront purchase. You don't have to subscribe. Now that they've walked back the PSN thing, you really don't have to subscribe to anything. So it'll just be interesting to see if they have, they've said they've worked on their roadmap, but they're not like super public with it because they want it to be surprising. But I do wonder if they have an endpoint, or an idea of an endpoint at this stage, or if they're just like not thinking about that yet.
Well, it does sort of feel like on one hand, it feels like, of course they don't. They have an unbelievable hit of a live service game. They have to milk this cash cow for every single drop, long past when they would artistically want to stop. Right?
But is it a cash cow, is my question. Like, I'm very curious if it is. That's all. Or if it will be in a year and a half.
Sure. I mean, that I think is fair. But also, you have to bear in mind that, Sony, has a chokehold on the prestige single-player 30-ish hour narrative experience game. They don't really have a very good or strong entry into the live service category, or not nearly as much. And so, that's certainly why they backed off on this PSN thing, because this is not a game that they can, afford. This kind of, breakout hit like this is not something you can afford to fumble. Especially if you aren't super well represented in the genre.
Sure, but I mean, Helldivers is on Steam, too.
Sure.
So it is not exclusively PlayStation, and if you're looking at things that are shared between PlayStation and PC, there are, Final Fantasy XIV, Genshin, all those third-party ones.
Yeah. I'm just saying, it's notable that it's sort of a step into a more direct step into this genre for Sony.
And there's Destiny's still going, right?
Yeah, of course. You're right.
They just bought Bungie, even.
Right. Fair enough. All I mean to say is it's a real breakout hit in an area where Sony has not necessarily had so many real breakout hits.
Right. And they've wanted to, although it seems like they've been backing off on that recently.
But it does sort of feel like if this were a game that would be allowed to end at any point, right? That's an open question, right? But if this were
if it was subscription based, or if there was any sort of sustained income model, I would say no, of course not. They want to keep this going forever. But I didn't see they said they're going to do DLCs. Maybe that'll be it. They just have sort of the expansions in 14 minus any additional subscription fee. Mm-hmm. Maybe it'll just be we get lump sums every once in a while, and that's how we keep ourselves going. I'm just curious about it. I wish it was we lived in a situation where you didn't have to think about that even. And you're just wow, this is a cool experience that they're building, and they'll do it for as long as they want to do it. But I am just curious of the economics of it.
Yeah. No. And it also feels obviously in this game, you are playing as the bad guys, right? There's something I was
Right.
reading, like, you're killing the bugs for, like, oil, right? The automatons that you're fighting used to be slaves, like robot slaves, and they're revolting. So, like, you're obviously the bad guy. And in any other narrative, the story where, like, you're the bad guy, but you sort of don't know it, and then you discover it over time, I don't know, ends in you taking down the evil empire or whatever it is. And that is both like a super interesting direction for a game like this to go, and also feels like, well, one, like that's almost an impossible narrative to tell with how this has been set up so far, and two, it just feels to me like if there's any kind of ongoing revenue stream for this, it will be hard for them to say no to that.
Well, for what it's worth, having watched Starship Troopers last week, and that being a very clear inspiration for this. That's not how Starship Troopers go.
Sure.
So there is no rebellion against the government. There's no maybe we shouldn't be killing the bugs, right? It's very much straightforward, only for the viewer to be thinking about the things that the characters are doing, right?
Sure, but at some point there has to be an end point, so you can look back
right.
and be like, whoa.
I just mean, doesn't necessarily mean that they will overthrow Super Earth. That's not necessarily the end point.
Fair enough, but some kind of definitive regime type moment feels like a necessary end point, and I'll be curious to see how or if they get there.
Well, shall we mash these games up?
Your ninja's infiltrating something.
I mean, I think that there's some sort of potential in a ninja. I'm thinking, I was like, didn't we do this last time? No, that was a thieves guild. We were talking about like a thieves guild last time. But yeah, like being part of like a ninja clan, ninja family, whatever those are called. And like partaking in missions for the sake of that family.
Yeah.
I feel like rather than being like a shooter, it would be more of like a stealth type game.
Yeah, I mean that would
or at
be
least
more
parts of
appropriate
it.
for ninjas.
Yeah, I know Shinobi's not stealth based, but because you would want to have a variety of missions basically, and I think that stealth would be one that you would want to work in.
I see that.
Just sort of fit with the characters you're working with.
Yeah.
Because Helldivers does have like a variety of different things you have to do, depending.
Yeah, I think
on
it's hard to put
mission.
Helldivers on top of the first game, on top of Shinobi, because it's easier to be like, oh, we're gonna do ninja infiltration, just being like, oh, you're a space guy jumping around on platforms. That is Metroid.
It's Metroid.
Yeah.
You can't just make Metroid.
Wait, Metroid already exists.
Yeah.
I did the live service ninja game.
We will finally release Metroid Prime 4. That's
there
our
we go.
We've been holding it hostage this whole time.
The truth has been revealed. No, ninja cooperative live service, count me in.
Well, not really. Neither of us would probably play that.
Count me in to enjoy the discourse around it.
Yeah, there you go.
Count me in to enjoy people role-playing as ninjas. Just a lot of like
that would probably
tweets.
Not be great, actually.
Why? Why not?
Just a lot of white people pretending to be ninjas, I guess.
What's wrong with that? You don't love Ryan?
Sure.
Is he from Judgment or is he from...
I don't know where he's from originally.
I can't remember.
But yeah, there might be something to... We're gonna have to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, we have to think about what the... I mean, look, Joe Musashi probably comes from a mixed background.
Or they just, it's like a nickname.
That's true. I'm just saying, there's room for everyone here. Even a guy named Joe.
Sure.
Might be less fun to like role play the Ninja Master though.
Yeah.
Just like a less distinct character.
Sure.
Or less distinct, like, and also, yeah, just very easy to be like, oh, that's racist now.
Yeah.
So difficult, but the community management team will figure all this out for us. We don't have to figure it out.
Was there a community manager fired? I saw some speculation about whether he was let go or not.
That, like, this community manager was encouraging people to write these negative reviews.
Yeah.
Which, like, on one hand, yeah, okay. On the other hand, man, you can't do that and expect to keep your job.
Yeah. Well, you know. So it goes.
So it goes.
That's what they'd say. That's what I'd say while playing a ninja.
Well, so it goes.
Well, so it goes.
Well, listeners, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Have you played Helldivers 2 or Shinobi? Do you wish that we could just have a Metroid game? Should we just have done Metroid for the mashup? What do you, if you had the ability to make the I keep trying to be like the prime directive, the major directive, if you had the opportunity to give like that order for millions of people to enact in a game, what would it be? If you have thoughts about this or anything else we talked about this week, visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat Emma's about to pull from, and read our blog featuring long-running series Click With Boyfriend and Split Screen. You can also follow us on social media. We're at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. But most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, really anywhere that you can find podcasts. Wherever your ninja heart can find podcasts or your diver heart can find podcasts. Listen to Talk This. It's my side quest next week. I have not decided what that is yet, so get ready for the surprise. But Emma, in 2 weeks, what is on the docket?
In 2 weeks, for our old game, we'll be talking about Monument Valley.
Cool.
And for our new game, we'll be talking about Diablo 4.
Woohoo!
Diablo 4, probably.
I didn't really hear a difference in how you said those two things.
Diablo.
Diablo.
Said the first time.
Diablo.
Yeah, well, so look forward to that.
That's it for our show. Emma, do you have a good sign-off?
This week, I hope that democracy is great.